Welcome to A Push Towards Success. In the previous video, we reviewed the concepts and frameworks of political systems, regimes, and governments. In today's video, we'll review Unit 2 of AP Comparative Government and Politics, starting right now. In Unit 1, we talked about the important concepts such as power, authority, and legitimacy. So here's a quick question. Let's say your teacher assigns a group project. How would you divide the work? How many people work on a task? How many roles are necessary to finish the project? All of this may depend on the strength of your friends, the class environment, project topic, or other factors. The same is true for governments. The founders of a state needs to create an organization that creates, enforces, and applies law. We call these political institutions. The three main institutions are executive, judicial, and legislative branch. The bureaucracy exists to support these branches to do their job. In general, the executive branch enforces the law, the legislative branch crafts the law, and the judicial branch interprets the law. I'll get into the details later in the video, but you need to know these three things in order to understand the three main government structures. But before that, let me briefly introduce the government structures of our 6 AP countries. So here's the United Kingdom and Iran. Then we got China. This is Russia's system. And we got Mexico and Nigeria. So, yes, all countries are unique, but the government structures can be divided mainly into 3 different types: presidential, parliamentary, and semi-presidential. What separates all 3 systems is the relationship between the executive, legislative, and judicial branch. You can see right here how the executive and legislative branch are separate in the presidential system. In a parliamentary system, these 2 branches are merged into one. In the semi-presidential system, we have a thing called the dual executive. Basically, 2 leaders are enforcing the law. In some countries, the dual executive share common powers, but in others, one is more dominant than the other. Let's talk about the unique characteristics of the presidential and parliamentary system. You can check out the list on the screen. The greatest difference is the check and balances, ease of passing law, and method of election. Because all branches are completely cut off in a presidential system, each branch has the power to check one another. While this can prevent corruption, it slows down the process of getting a law passed. In a parliamentary system, because the executive branch is merged with the legislative branch, laws are easier to get passed. Another difference is the method of election. In a presidential system, people are voting for an individual. In a parliamentary system, people are voting for a party. Because people are voting for a party, the party is required to get the majority. If the party by itself cannot reach this requirement, they will be forced to form a coalition. Political coalitions forces different political parties to compromise in order to make an alliance. What's interesting about political coalitions is the fact that any party can make a coalition. For example, although this is a non-AP country, in Israel's 2021 election, a bunch of small parties grouped up to take down the main party. This is completely democratic. There are 2 more interesting powers unique to the parliamentary system. Opposition parties in a parliamentary system can pass a vote of no confidence. This is similar to impeachment because politicians in the parliament are voting to kick out the current leader. You need a majority for a successful vote of no confidence, not a 2/3 requirement like in presidential systems. One unique power of the Prime Minister is the power to call a snap election. This is the ability to schedule an election anytime the Prime Minister would like. Prime Ministers may do this to avoid a vote of no confidence or try to gain more seats in the parliament. We also need to talk about semi-presidential systems. One of the benefits of a semi-presidential system is having a dual executive. Whenever a president leaves the office, there's a gap in transition. Many presidential systems solve this gap problem by having one executive remain while the other changes. Semi-presidential systems can also divide up burdensome executive work between 2 strong leaders. There are demerits as well. Depending on the country, the power balance and role may differ. There are times where one particular executive may get extremely powerful as well. Now that we know the 3 different systems, let's talk about each individual branch. We'll start off with the executive branch, the law enforcer. While the executive branch consists of multiple individuals making sure that laws are being enforced in their country, there is usually 1 or 2 faces that represent this branch. Each country has a head of state and a head of government. The head of state is the executive leader with ceremonial powers and represents the nation. The head of government is the leader who enforces the law and creates a vision for a country. Here's a chart that shows the term limits and election process of the head of state and government. In a country like the United Kingdom, the Queen is the head of state and the Prime Minister is the head of the government. In America, the President fulfills both of these roles. The leader cannot steer the entire country by him or herself, so the President or Prime Minister creates a cabinet or a group of experts to conduct important duties. This can be leading the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Department of Defense, and so on. Let's use an example. If a car is a country, the driver is the executive, and the dude sitting next to the driver is the cabinet members. The GPS is the bureaucracy, the civil servants who support the driver. These civil servants do the paperwork, like stamping you a visa, to make sure the law is enforced. There are certain check and balances within the executive branch, such as term limits and rules to kick out an incompetent leader. Of course, this all depends on the country. Here's a chart that shows the different responsibilities between the head of state and government. Other than the United Kingdom, all head of states are commanders-in-chief. Usually, the head of state's power is limited to being a ruler rather than a crafter of law. However, we see how in Russia, the president has the power to draft bills. On the contrary, head of governments are involved in leading domestic policies such as Iran and the UK. If you're used to US politics, the president of Mexico and Nigeria share similar responsibilities to the president in America. What's important about the executive branch is the existence of terms. If a country has a term limit, that also means that the individual in office cannot rerun and renew his or her term unless you're in Russia or China. So now that we covered the enforcer of the law, let's talk about the crafter of the law, the legislative branch. At the legislative branch, regular politicians from different political parties debate one another to create laws. Depending on the country, there may be one or two arenas to allow such debates to take place. If a country only has one location to debate and pass policies, we call that unicameralism. If a country has two locations, we call that bicameralism. These bodies are called chambers or houses depending on the country. A country with a unicameral chamber may have greater ease with passing laws, but they will lack a check and balance system within the legislative system. Bicameralism usually allows greater representation, and depending on the country, they may try to accurately represent the will of the people. For example, in America, the House of Representatives reflect the population size, while the Senate provide the equal number of senators per state. Here's a chart that shows the name, term, and the sizes of the houses in our 6 AP countries. Notice how China's lower house is roughly 3,000 in size, which is the largest parliament in the world. Additionally, most upper houses are smaller in size. There is one exception, the United Kingdom. The UK has no fixed number of upper house representatives, and currently they have 800 representatives. Here's another chart that compares and contrasts the responsibilities and powers of the lower and upper house. If you're overwhelmed, let me share you a secret. Lower houses are usually stronger than the upper house. Yes, there are exceptions, but it's a start. For example, the House of Lords can only delay legislation, but cannot create any laws. In Russia, the Federation Council is unique because it has the power to approve troop deployment. If you're used to US politics, the Nigerian and Mexican legislative branch look really similar to the American system. That's another trick to memorize these houses. Before we proceed, there's one big asterisk for Iran. That is, although Iran has only one chamber, the reality is that it acts more like a bicameral state. All laws passed in the Majles are reviewed by the Guardian Council. If the Guardian Council believes that the law violates the Constitution or Islam, the Majles will need to revise their laws. Here's our third trick. While the UK is bicameral, it acts unicameral, and while Iran is unicameral, it acts bicameral. Alright, now that we're done with the enforcer and the crafter, let's talk about the last branch. Judicial Branch, the interpreter. The main job of this branch is to judge individuals based on past laws. One crucial function of the judicial branch is to make sure the executive and legislative branch are abiding by the rule of law. This is called judicial review. The majority of countries around the world, with the exception of the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and your authoritarian countries, have judicial review. There are two types of law, common law and civil law. Common law means that whatever the judge declares becomes law. In other words, the final verdict becomes law and infiltrates all levels of courts. Countries like America, UK, Nigeria use common law. The other type is civil law. Civil law means that judges rule based on what the law says and therefore doesn't allow much interpretation. Most of Europe, including Russia, uses civil law. Mexico, unlike America and Nigeria, uses civil law. Here's a chart of the judicial branch in our 6 AP countries. What matters the most is the power and the relationship with the government. Term length doesn't matter as much if the line between the judicial and executive branch are blurred. There are probably two interesting facts within this chart. For starters, The UK lacks judicial review. The reason why the UK does not have judicial review is because all laws passed in the Parliament are legally constitutional. Additionally, the UK did not have a Supreme Court. The highest court of appeals used to be the House of Lords. This changed in 2009 when the UK established the Supreme Court under the House of Lords. The main purpose is to hear crucial cases such as Brexit, problems created by devolution, and formally evaluating British laws to EU laws. Another interesting fact is Nigeria's dual system. Given Nigeria's heavy Muslim population in the north, the northern state utilizes Sharia courts. As you review the political institutions of the 6 different AP countries, keep in mind that this is comparative government. You want to compare these systems. Ask yourself whether term limits strengthen or weaken a country. Connect Unit 2 to Unit 1. Which is better, presidential or parliamentary systems? In what ways might power, authority, legitimacy, and stability differ between the two systems? I also want to hear your opinion on which out of the 3 institutions are the strongest: executive, legislative, or judicial. Share your thoughts in the comments section and I will respond to your thoughts. If you thought this was helpful, drop a like and subscribe if you want more of this content. Happy reviewing, and let's make that push towards success.